Yo, this is the Ancient Texan. I'm going to talk about a train wreck that's fixing to happen in Taiwan. To most of us, it's kind of in the distance and doesn't really matter much. We hear our government talking about it in China, the CCP, the government leader. We have Pelosi visiting the president of Taiwan, whose name I've forgotten. Kind of illustrating the point, most of us don't really pay that much attention to what's going on. Well, let's kind of look at it from all three points of view. Xi in China has mostly got over COVID, and it was an economic disaster for China. They closed a lot of their cities down, the manufacturing suffered, kind of accelerated the US and other countries starting to pull manufacturing plants out of China. There's large unemployment. Their real estate sector has crashed. Local governments mostly lease land and let people build buildings on them. Their revenue streams are drying up. The entire country's one big bundle of debt. They've loaned out money to other countries on their Belt and Road Initiative, and most of that's going south. China has border disputes, and they're intimidating all of their neighbors, especially Taiwan. They're doing practice invasion drills where they're going over the median line between the island and the mainland. Xi has told their country to prepare for war. China believes that Taiwan belongs to it, and that the people that live there are a rebellious people, and they're also a very bad example because they have a democracy and they're prosperous. So one thing that you do when your economy is going south, things are not working well at home, it's a classic trick. You make an enemy. Taiwan, US is the bad guy in Xi's story. The CCP, the propaganda is America has led Taiwan astray, giving them expectations that they can always be free and have a democracy and be a sovereign nation. And they're giving them such foolish ideas. So that's China, and they're probably they are preparing for war, and they're seriously been doing it for a long time. They are now have the biggest navy in the world, not the most competent. Their ships are confined to about 1,000 miles. Mostly the South China Sea is where they could operate. Much past that, they don't have the ports, or the ships are mostly diesel, gasoline powered. They can't go a great distance. They built one big carrier. How operational that is and how seasoned their navy is another issue. However, they do have the ability to launch large amount of missiles from the shore, so their navy, if you get close to Taiwan, our ships can be taken out of the ocean by a large barrage of missiles, and it's believed that it's easy for them to overwhelm our missile defense systems if we get in close. Maybe even if we're 1,000 miles away, out toward Guam and stuff. So it makes it more difficult for us to launch. So she has built up the ability, and they're also increasing the number of helicopters to take troops across that 100 miles, because you're kind of out there in the open in the ocean. That 100 miles going across in a boat, it's pretty easy pickings. Now, so that's kind of where China is. Taiwan belongs to it. The U.S. is interfering. Their propaganda is one China. The 25 million people, what they want's not relevant. What's the U.S.? What's their big deal? Well, we'd like to say it's because it's a democracy of 25 million people, kind of like Ukraine. We're standing up for the democracies of the world, and that's probably a factor. But they also have a chip producer, TSMC, which turns out to be is the most advanced chip maker in the world, bar none. Samsung and Intel in the U.S., Samsung in Korea, and NVIDIA, their graphic chips. Those are the kind of top tier chip companies. But Taiwan, TSMC is the go-to most advanced chips in the world. And they're probably ahead of 5 years of anybody. Maybe 10. I mean, it's a significant gap, and they're not standing still. They're going to build some chip factories in the U.S. My guess is if they're smart, they're playing their cards that the U.S. factories won't be quite. They'll probably be the current generation of chip in TSMC, and I'm guessing they're smart business people, which they are. They've probably got some stuff up their sleeves to stay the most advanced. Intel is claiming they're going to catch up, but they've been claiming that for a decade. So we got the most advanced chip maker in the world, and that turns out that is a huge. There's no huger issue than being the most advanced chip company. For who? Our military industrial complex. Our military needs TSMC to keep going. We've recently cut off both the high grade and the medium grade chips. Can't be sold to China, and the people that make the lithographic machine that uses ultraviolet light that is generated by passing a light beam through a laser through molten tin. So that is like far out, a stream of molten tin that's pouring down, and a beam goes through it, and it etches the circuit, which is billions of transistors, like in an Apple cell phone. Those are the people that can do it. And our military, in not only the guided the systems, the GPS systems and the systems on the missiles, but also our satellites and our AI systems that are gathering intelligence and separating out uh, electrical signals from, like from the noise, and then making sense out of all the communications going on around the world and signals being sent to other devices. The chips and the brains for that come from the chips to TSMC. What would that do to the world? About 10% of the chips, of the 1,000 chips that are in your car, come from TSMC. That's just an example. But their chips are used in not everything, but a whole lot of stuff all around the world. Car manufacturing would stop without TSMC. One missile with an explosive device doesn't even have to be big. Could be enough to take out the factory. There's very few people that know anything about chips that don't recognize that that's going to cause at least a recession, depression. Manufacturing all over the world is going to shut down. We had a little minor taste of it during the pandemic. We had shortage of chips. Much worse. So that's the U.S. interest. You're going to add in, their democracy too. Okay, and then who do we have in the middle? Taiwan, the Taiwanese. About 90% of them favor being an independent country that runs their own business and is independent of China. The creativity and the talent required to become the very best at the most difficult technology that exists in the world is really impressive. I'm convinced that that kind of technology cannot come out of a top-down autocratic government. I've done research most of my life. I'm still doing it, although I'm between gigs. And you have to have the ability to fail for research to work. It is a cornerstone of research, is ability to fail, learn from it, make improvements, and move on. You can't be in an environment of fear and do good research. You can't be in an environment where someone is telling you everything you need to do and is afraid to lose face. This doesn't work. China has been working at making chips and spent a lot of money on it with very little progress. They have made a lot of progress, though, on AI, but that requires the medium and high-grade chips, mostly the high-grade chips that TSMC creates. So their AI is probably going to come to a screeching halt without the ability to make their own chips. We kind of guess. Intel says they're 5 years behind. They might be 10. Well, China's, 10 plus years behind. And they close that gap with a lot of money and effort. I don't know. I mean, my theory is that you can't do that kind of ultra advanced research in their kind of climate. But who knows? They haven't been able to yet. But at least, for a decade, them not having the chips could make a big difference in the effectiveness of our military, our air superiority, our missile defense systems, our carriers. At some point, who knows? Okay, so people in Taiwan just want to have, life. They want to have their elections, structure a country like they want it to be. And China, who's also in the middle of a demographic collapse like the world has never seen before. Their population is crashing. Their one-child policy really, really worked. And now, if you want to have working people, you've got to start 40 years ago. And their country's getting old, and they don't have the workers to support the old people that are coming. Can they make robots or something and take care of old people? Maybe. Who knows? I mean, people do what they have to do. They have droughts, real estate failure, water shortage. They import 60% of their energy. Now they're getting, teamed up with Russia, who it's kind of common, you're a friend to your common enemy, the U.S. But China also gets all their money. They're an export economy. They need customers. U.S. is the biggest customer. The relationship with U.S. is deteriorating. Both sides. It started with Trump, but one of the few things I agree with Trump, that China has been not playing by the rules of the game. They pretty much, for instance, take magnesium that I'm familiar with. They kept expanding production. They went to actually a lower level of technology and subsidize the energy. And their mission is to keep a lot of people employed, make a lot of magnesium, whether the world needs it or not, keep the price suppressed, puts everybody that's more advanced and that cares about the environment and paying people out of business. Once everybody's out of business, they raise the price, although they don't go crazy, because there's a few other countries that have supplemented or subsidized their magnesium producers. The same thing has also happened in aluminum. They keep expanding production, keeping their people employed, keep 2 sets of books, don't worry about the environment, subsidize energy, put a lot of people around the world out of business, subsequently raise prices. It's kind of their modus operandi. They're a system that cares about keeping people employed, and that's their contract with the people. So that's what they do. So I haven't been, and they steal technology. First generation, you put a plant in China, then China steals your technology and reproduces it, and doesn't respect any of the intellectual property. Seen that happening. So they don't play by the same rules. Now they want to take over Taiwan because their own economy's crap, and we're the bad guys. Taiwanese are the bad guys. They built up their navy to do so, and they're probably going to make a run at it. Now, what's the bottom line result of what happens here? And this is this whole podcast about this. You can skip to here. Of course, I should have told you that up front. You have 25 million people. Maybe 1 million of people of those will lose their lives with missiles coming over from China. when they attack. The first wave will be probably a barricade, ocean, encirclement of the island, blockade, missiles destroying everything, waves of helicopters, amphibious craft invade the country. U.S. has sold Taiwan a bunch of stuff, probably the wrong stuff, but we made a lot of money off of them. Don't forget that, off of Taiwan. U.S. can come from Guam and from Japan, and Japan will probably get involved in the war because part of the encirclement of Taiwan will also end up encircling some islands that belong to Japan. So Japan's going to be sucked into it. Japan has an impressive navy. So we talk about winning, but winning here is really sick. Winning means 1 million Taiwanese die. It could be 10,000 to 100,000 Americans, and large amounts of aircraft carriers that cost tens of billions to build. And we can shut down China. Their navy is just not up to speed once they get away from South China Sea. We can stop energy from coming into their country, and food. They have to import most of their food, most of their energy. That, unless you have a world-class navy, which, if all the people that needed to ship to them were in the South China Sea, that would be okay. But they get stuff from all over the world, and it goes out all over the world, none of which they can support. And the people that are close by, they've antagonized so much that those are not their big customers. Their customers are in Africa, Europe, South America. They import from all over the world, mostly Latin America and Africa, for the raw materials. They can't sustain that. So China attacking Taiwan is like a suicide mission. It's like really stupid, and it could result in the deaths of millions of Chinese, especially on the second wave. If it's protracted and you cut off energy and food, within 6 months, half the country will starve to death. It's logic. A war would never happen because it's just plain stupid on China's part. She has got some kind of Hitler Mace tongue. He's got something wrong with him to play that card. But there's a pretty good chance he's been telling his military to get ready, and there's a strong right faction that's as stupid as our far right faction. So who really ends up at the end of the day, there's a lose-lose, is if, I don't know how you just say who wins, but if China or the U.S. wins, either one of those, Taiwan loses, because they lose a lot of people. They probably have the chip factory destroyed, and it's probably never rebuilt. And I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. didn't have a plan to expatriate all of their chip people. And if they don't, China does. They're not going to be free people after this. And I suspect they'll pick the U.S. to live in instead of China. But technology will go away. The whole damn world will go into depression. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. That's how important their chips are. You can get some other expert. I don't know exactly who you'd find, but I've been listening to the experts, and that's pretty much the conclusion. So Taiwan loses, both in people, way of life. If China takes over, they completely lose, their sovereignty. If the U.S. is able to prevail, maybe they can go back to live in a democracy, and maybe in, 10 years they can rebuild their economy and live in fear the rest of their life for it happening again. Now, there's one other really big thing that could go down. China has about 300 plus nuclear weapons. They have the ability to deliver them to all our major cities. Whether that could be a limited, just knock out LA to make an example, and we knock out Beijing. They pick 3 cities, we pick 3 cities, only kill, tens of millions of people. We act like that can't happen because it hasn't happened. But we're as stupid as she on that front. And when you start playing with nuclear weapons, everybody kind of becomes equal, because everybody, the big boys, have the ability to wipe out countries. And we don't have the ability to stop the number of missiles that will come at us. And neither do they. And we can say, that who's provoking whom and all that kind of stuff. But we're on a downward spiral. The U.S. military strategy is encirclement. They've got a string of islands around China that they want to keep them contained in the South China Sea. China flexes their muscle in the South China Sea and intimidates all of their neighbors and claims the sea goes right up, not quite to the shore, but goes up close against all the countries, well inside the agreed 200-mile international boundary that most countries honor. And they have literally border disputes and skirmishes with all the countries that live in their neighborhood. So those people aren't going to be their markets, or they're, not there to help them. So how does it all end up bad? It's just what degree of bad? One level of bad is they do a blockade and we help Taiwan run the blockade, and we have little, sink each other's ship and a few fighter jets, and it's very restrained. But even that's probably going to interfere with trade into Taiwan, which, if it interferes with chips, it interferes with the whole world. That's kind of like the best case scenario. A more likely scenario is both sides suffer big losses and restrain themselves from using nuclear weapons. We blockade China. China and U.S. sit down at the table, agree to open up the border, and we go back into some kind of troubled truce. But even then, China would be in the world of hurt, even if the oceans, open back up again, because they're going to be making war with the same people they trade with. There's already mass exodus of U.S. manufacturing out of China. In Apple, it's the biggest but they're trying to get set up in India uh, to manufacture. India's not on good terms with China either. They have border disputes, minor skirmishes so far. They'd be glad to take over business from China. They've got a long way to go. They're so bureaucratic they can't tie their shoes without, 3 levels of government. But essentially, we have a situation that human beings ought to be able to sit down and see how stupid it is. Main thing, I'm biased here, but I think the main thing is China needs to recognize 25 million people have the right to be self-determined. But we don't. We follow that as per convenient. Look how well we treat Puerto Rico. They're a stepchild of ours. So there's no good guy here, except maybe the Taiwanese people. I don't know what the hell they're doing wrong. They're just in the wrong damn place. But we're kind of primitive that we have to resolve something like this by military action. It would be cheaper to, pick up all the Taiwanese people and move them to a, similar sized space in, Texas or the Midwest or something. Sell them a big plot of land. I'm sure that's not what they want to do, but it might be better than having bombs dropped on top of you and living next to a neighbor that's thinks you have no rights because of a historical interpretation of what went down when the nationalists fled from the mainland into Taiwan. I think it's in 47 or 45. Anyway, a long time ago, older than I am, 75, 77 years ago. From that historical precedent, it's locked and loaded for the Chinese. That's stupid, but that's what I think. I think she is stupid. I think it's not the way to treat people. But I can't believe the U.S. is like, we should be in meetings every single day with China trying to figure this out. And with the Taiwanese. The Taiwanese should be able to have their voice. Of course, their voice gets too loud. The people in China hear it. So that's a problem. That's why China makes such a big deal when somebody comes and visits Taiwan and treats them like they're real people that have real rights and opinions. And I actually think it's worth going to war for and dying over. Things like democracies in Ukraine and Taiwan. But it's easy for me to say that because no one's going to let me fight. But I can say it on here and voice my opinion. And I could wish that I had some magic pill for humanity. Some way of educating the human race to be a little kinder toward their fellow humans and not try to control other humans. But that's just me. That's just the ancient Texan. I've got my Alamo and remember the Alamo type thing, which is a story, but it's a good story. And one day Ukraine may have their story, their national, when they founded their country, when they had a revolution from Russia and won, assuming we can get our act together and give them the offensive weapons they need and quit being so afraid of Russia. Because at the end of the day, we made the nuclear weapons mistake a long time ago, and we're just making living in fear of nuclear weapons and making a lot of mistakes. And yet at the same time, we not kept our word about reducing our nuclear weapons. There's this whole another podcast, but we made promises that we would reduce our nuclear weapons. The ones that had made that promise, and other people promised not to get them, but we didn't keep our promise and haven't made that big an effort to make it happen. So even Obama expanded our nuclear weapons. Spent some $1 billion program he said to expand our nuclear capabilities. So we're in this big arms race to make more nuclear weapons so we can kill ourselves more, and we're trying to make more defensive weapons so the other side makes more offensive weapons. Laser cannons. All stupidity. So nuclear weapons, which is actually, standing in the background, it's the elephant in the room in both Ukraine and in China. The elephant in the room is nuclear weapons. And yet we talk about global warming, climate evolution as being an existential threat. No. Existential threat is a big rock running into our planet, our nuclear weapons. Those are existential threats. Climate will hurt the poor people of the world. It'll hurt the people that live near the ocean, although the ocean's been rising 100 years, foot a year, foot a decade or something for a long, long time. It's been on this same, rate of rise long before Industrial Revolution. So that's going to happen. Our engineering plan for climate change sucks, which we've covered that in others. So in the middle of all this, big things going on in the world, undoubtedly we're headed toward a war in Taiwan. That's going to have huge consequences because of the chips for the whole world. It's going to affect your life. It's going to affect you going to college. It's going to affect your children's life. It's going to affect generations, many generations. This is not a little deal. And depending on how carried away both sides get, it could friggin' wipe out the northern hemisphere. It's a big deal, and if China and Russia, partner up with nuclear weapons, it could be lights out for our planet. Nothing else set us back to the Stone Age, literally. And yet, we kind of muddle forward. We have all sorts of rhetoric going on, and people talking tough and stupid. Anyway, there's enough stupid and bad guys here to go around for everybody. This is the ancient Texan, not really knowing how to solve this, but just kind of blowing some smoke here and wishing more people were upset about these kind of things. But you shouldn't be upset about what you want. Maybe somebody messed up your laundry. Or they quit making your local beer. Or they raised the interest rate on your loan. Anyway, this is the Ancient Texan wishing you a good day, and I hope I said a few things that kind of messed up your day. Namaste.